I've been fortunate enough to travel to a dozen different places over the past several years, and my experiences playing Pokemon Go has been very different in all of those different locations. And that's the purposes of this video. I'm going to be talking about all of the different places that I've been to and whether or not you can actually get a really good Pokemon Go experience if you were to ever visit them. Alright, how's it going everyone? Count Jinsula here with a brand new Pokemon Go video. I hope your day is going really well, and let's get right into it. So for longtime viewers of my channel, you would know that I love to travel. I usually go to 3 different locations every single year, and over the years I've been to over a dozen places all around the world. I've been to places like Bali, I've been to places like the Maldives, I've also been to places like Italy. And every time I go to a new location, I always play Pokemon Go. I always spend some time to at least experience the Pokemon Go play in those areas. And I will say that there are plenty of places that definitely live up to the hype. There's places that are kind of like hidden gems for Pokemon Go. And there's also places where it is definitely overhyped, where people talk about playing Pokemon Go there is a great experience, but in reality, it just doesn't feel that good. And I want to talk about all of that. I obviously haven't been to all different locations in the world. There are certainly places in Europe and Asia that I would love to travel to, but overall, I feel like I've been to enough places where I can give you an idea of what it's like to play Pokemon Go in those areas. So yeah, let's start things off by going domestic. Let's talk about my hometown of downtown Chicago. I will say Chicago is personally my favorite city. It is the greatest city in the world, in my opinion. And when it comes to Pokemon Go, I definitely think it's one of the best places to play. The reason why I say that is because if you are someone who wants to do a whole bunch of raid battles, or if you're someone who just wants to walk around, sightsee, and catch a whole bunch of Pokemon, there's definitely a lot of places for that in Chicago. And even though I've traveled all around the world, I've been to places that are extremely poppin' when it comes to Pokemon Go. I feel like nothing compares to downtown Chicago. And yes, I totally recognize that I am very biased because I definitely love my home city and I love it more than any other city that I've ever been to. And I really can't find myself being anywhere else. I think Chicago is phenomenal. I think there's so many different hotspots for Pokemon Go that mostly locals will know about, that people who are visiting may not necessarily know about. But if you want to know what those places are, I will put a link to a video in the description below. I have a guide video for playing Pokemon Go in Chicago, and it's definitely something that if you ever plan to visit Chicago, you need to watch first, because Pokemon Go is definitely really good in Chicago. You just need to go to the right places. So yeah, check out the video in the description, or I'll put a card to it right here. This is where the cards are, right? Yeah. I'll put a card to that video in that corner, so definitely go and check that out. I think Chicago is great. I think Chicago is one of the best cities for Pokemon Go, and if you've never experienced it, maybe one day you should. Maybe come out here for a Pokemon Go Fest Global and experience Chicago the way it's meant to be when it comes to Pokemon Go play. It's definitely a great city, and you could definitely get yourself some really good Pokemon while you're out here. But next, let's move to a place that not a lot of players have probably been to, but in terms of Pokemon Go, it's actually not worth coming anyway. If you're coming out to the Maldives specifically to play Pokemon Go, I really think you need to reconsider. There's plenty of really good reasons to come out to the Maldives. It's the place that I went to for my 5-year anniversary. It was a beautiful place. Like, I love the Maldives, and it is definitely a bucket list item for a lot of people. If you really want to experience like a true tropical vacation, you need to come out to the Maldives. But when it comes to Pokemon Go, definitely not so much. The way the Maldives works is that every single resort is its own private island, and you charter a water plane to get to your resort. It's very interesting. It's very different and unique from any other vacation experience. But that also means that you're at the mercy of your own personal island. I was fortunate enough to actually have at least a Pokestop and a gym at my island, but that was it. There was not many Pokemon spawns, there was not many places where I could just sit and play Pokemon Go. And yeah, because of that, I will say the Maldives is a terrible place for playing Pokemon Go. You definitely do not want to go there if you want to specifically play Pokemon Go. Even at the major city, the one major city which is located on one island, it is not that substantial when it comes to like points of interest, and when it comes to Pokemon spawn points, it's just not a good place for Pokemon Go. But like I said, it is a beautiful vacation spot, and yeah, if you're lucky, maybe there's going to be a gym and a Pokestop, and if that is the case, you're going to have a very unique postcard in your postcard collection. So yeah, that is something you should keep in mind. Next up, let's talk about another tropical location, which I'm sure a lot of people have actually visited, and I'm talking about the Bahamas. I've been to the Bahamas quite often, whether it be for going on cruises or going to a specific island in the Bahamas for like a weekend getaway. The Bahamas is always a great experience. It's a lot of fun. Maybe if you go to places like St. Kitts, you could have a very different experience from, let's say, Nassau, but overall, I think the Bahamas is always a great time. But when it comes to Pokemon Go, it's very similar to the Maldives. You're going to be at the mercy of whatever island you visit. Yes, there are certain islands that are going to have major hubs, and you're going to have a whole bunch of Pokestops and gyms. Maybe at the resort you're staying, there's going to be a lot of points of interest. But yeah, again, it's really dependent on where you go. And I will say, because it is a more secluded experience, you're not going to get like a bustling city-wide play. You really can't do something like a raid hour or a raid day or even a Pokemon Go Fest in the Bahamas. You can get a very relaxed play. Maybe you could catch a whole bunch of Pokemon, different things like that, but aside from that, yeah, I will say the Bahamas is not necessarily a great place for playing Pokemon Go. That's just my own personal opinion. And then finally, when it comes to islands, we got to talk about Hawaii. Hawaii is, of course, one of the states of the United States. And where I was playing, there's not much. I went to Maui both times I've been to Hawaii, and yeah, maybe it's just specifically Maui. I know there's a huge Pokemon Go presence in Hawaii, specifically around Honolulu, but I will say that when it comes to like the true Pokemon Go experience, you're not really going to get it in Hawaii. I could be wrong. I do need to visit other places in Hawaii. There's definitely a lot to do in Hawaii, but from everything that I've personally experienced, it's very similar to the Bahamas as well as the Maldives. It's a very secluded spot. There's not much in terms of points of interest, and it really depends on where you're at. If you're at a resort without any Pokestops or gyms, you're obviously not going to have a really good time. But if there happens to be a Pokestop and a gym at the resort, then yeah, you're going to get some unique postcards, and you're still going to be able to get your Pokeballs and catch a whole bunch of different Pokemon. The one nice thing about Hawaii is, of course, it has a very exclusive regional, which is Comfey. If you're going out hunting for Comfey, it's going to be a pretty fun experience. I actually have a vlog video where I go and chase after Comfey, and I think getting that Pokemon was quite the experience because it felt for the very first time that I was getting a regional Pokemon in a place that I typically do not go to. So I think because of that, it might be a very fun experience, but aside from that, there's really not much to do. You're not going to get a very positive raid hour, for example. You're gonna have a very hard time filling up those raid battles, like those raid lobbies. It's really mostly just Comfey. That is the highlight of going to Hawaii and playing Pokemon Go. Alright, so let's move away from the island nations and island locations. Now let's go into actual cities. And there's going to be only one European city in this video because I've only been to one European city. Well, actually, I should say one European country. But let's talk about Italy. I will say Rome is naturally going to be filled with Pokestops and gyms. There's just a lot of unique architecture and a lot of landmarks. So naturally, there's going to be a huge amount of points of interest. But I was actually quite surprised that raid battles would fill up very easily. And there was actually a lot of Pokemon spawns. So Rome is a really great place for playing Pokemon Go. I would equate it to the same as places like New York, where there's a lot of Pokestops and gyms. And there is a lot of people who are playing Pokemon Go in Italy. I was actually quite surprised. And then of course there is the two regionals, which is going to be Mime Jr. and Mr. Mime. Getting those is actually quite exciting, and if you're able to go out to Italy, I do think it's a really great time for playing Pokemon Go, specifically in Rome. When it came to Venice and Florence, there was definitely a lot to do there. There was a lot of points of interest there as well. But yeah, I will say it wasn't as substantial as Rome, but it was still a really great time. When I was out there, I was focusing more on the touristy stuff anyway, like going on different tours and checking out a lot of the art pieces and different things like that. I actually went on a wine tour as well. So I think because of that, you know, you might get some decent Pokemon Go play, but I would suggest that if you're going to any of those places, you should just focus on the architecture and you should just focus on all the cool stuff that you could see there. Now, this next one is kind of difficult to talk about because when I went there, initially, there was no Pokemon Go. I'm of course talking about South Korea. South Korea, from everything that I've heard, it is probably the second best country for Pokemon Go. It is one of the places in the world that you would be surprised is incredibly popular when it comes to the Pokemon franchise. It's right next to Japan, so it totally makes sense. Anything that Japan does, it usually goes over to Korea. Anything that Korea does goes over to Japan. But yeah, when it comes to Pokemon, it is absolutely massive there. And from what I understand, it's actually the second largest market for Pokemon. So yeah, naturally, because the Pokemon fandom is so big in Korea, you're going to see raid lobbies filled up to the max every single time. And just in general, there's just going to be a ton of Pokestops and there's going to be a ton of gyms. But when I went to Korea, I could only play in one location, which was Sokjo, South Korea, just because of a loophole where they actually do not have the map system that, you know, at the time it was very confusing. Basically what happened was that back in the day, Pokemon Go relied on Google Maps, but South Korea does not have Google. So because of that, they did not have Pokemon Go. But in this one corner of the country in Sokjo, South Korea, they actually still had Pokemon Go because aside from Google Maps, there was other navigation apps that actually worked in that one corner of the country. So when I went out to Korea, I obviously only had one Pokemon Go experience, and that was in Sokjo, and I will say it was pretty fun. At the time, it was the first 150 Pokemon, so it was one of those locations where you could get Farfetch, and that was incredibly exciting at the time. I will say my experience was very positive, but I'm just going mostly on word of mouth. South Korea is going to be one of the best places to play Pokemon Go, just based on everything that I've heard. But I will say I will give you a more hands-on experience with Korea, specifically with Seoul and Busan, because I will be traveling to South Korea for a good amount of time within, I think, in the next 2 months. I will be there and I will be making a lot of videos and giving you a more hands-on experience. So be on the lookout for that. All right, and moving back to the United States, let's talk about Florida. So I've been to plenty of different places in Florida, but specifically I've been to Miami and Fort Lauderdale quite a lot. And Florida is Florida. There is definitely a lot of Pokemon Go content within Florida, specifically in Miami and Fort Lauderdale. There's a lot of Pokestops, there's a lot of places you can walk to collect a lot of Pokemon and do a whole bunch of raids. But I will say it is a bit mid. If you're ever going to Florida, probably the best places to play Pokemon Go is going to be Disney World. That's from what I've heard. But when it comes to Miami and when it comes to Fort Lauderdale, it's a very typical experience. It's not like you're getting yourself anything special. The one thing I will say is you can come across Maractus as well as Heracross. There's a lot of regionals within just Miami and Fort Lauderdale. Also, Carnivine, that's actually another Pokemon that spawns. So I will say Florida is actually a bit of a hidden gem when it comes to getting regional Pokemon. Specifically when it comes to Fort Lauderdale, I think you can get a whole bunch of different regionals there. Corsola is another Pokemon that spawns there. Yeah, that's pretty much what's special about Florida when it comes to Pokemon Go play. I'm sure there's going to be players out there who will say that, yes, the Pokemon Go community is pretty substantial over in Florida, but by my own personal experiences, I will say not necessarily as much as places like New York, LA, and Chicago. So yeah, that's just based on my own personal experiences. All right, and the last two stops are going to be places that are just known for Pokemon Go. Let's talk about Santa Monica. I think a lot of people have been wondering if Santa Monica would be on this list, and yes, I have been to the supposed Pokemon Go Mecca, and I will say it's a little bit overhyped. I know there's going to be a lot of Californians who are going to be really mad at me saying that, but if Santa Monica Pier is supposed to be the mecca for Pokemon Go, I just don't believe that. I think there's a lot of places around the world that have exactly what Santa Monica Pier has, and yeah, I just don't think it's as crazy as a lot of people make it out to be. Don't get me wrong, Santa Monica Pier is amazing when it comes to Pokemon Go. It's definitely the best spot in LA proper. But I will say it's not as crazy as a lot of people make it out to be. There's definitely a huge amount of Pokemon spawns. Like if your aim is to catch a whole bunch of Pokemon, yes, it's a very great spot for catching Pokemon. But when it comes to raid battles and when it comes to Pokestops, it just seems very typical. Like I get the very same experience here in Chicago with Navy Pier. There's the same amount of Pokemon. I feel like there's even more gyms in Navy Pier and Pokestops, and they also have the indoor walking area in Navy Pier. So I almost prefer Navy Pier here in Chicago over Santa Monica. But even with that said, I will say Santa Monica is a pretty cool place for Pokemon Go. But overall, it's not as hyped up as a lot of people make it out to be, especially YouTubers. And I totally understand that a majority of Pokemon Go YouTubers live out in California, specifically near Santa Monica, so of course they're going to be a little bit biased. But is it the mecca that a lot of players make it out to be? No, I will say it's not, but it's still a pretty great place to go out and play Pokemon Go. All right, let's cap this off with the place that I just came back from. New York City. So New York City, in my opinion, is probably the best city-wide experience place for playing Pokemon Go. When it comes to raid battles, yes, there's a whole bunch of gyms, there's a whole bunch of Pokestops, you're always going to be stocked up on items, there's a lot of Pokemon spawns, and then every single raid battle is going to be filled up to 20 people. It's a pretty great place for playing Pokemon Go. I think it really comes down to the high density of players. There's just so many people who are going to be in New York City that it's going to be really hard to be in a specific area and not find players who are playing Pokemon Go. But I will say that my experiences are specifically based on there being a Pokemon Go Fest. There are plenty of times where I've been to New York without Pokemon Go Fest and experienced Pokemon Go in that regard. And I will say that in places like Times Square, when in places like Central Park, yes, there's going to be a lot of Pokemon Go play. But it is a city experience. It's what you would typically find in a downtown of a city. It's nothing else aside from that. You can get Boofaland, that's the one regional that you can find in New York, but aside from that, yeah, I will say it's a very typical city experience, but that may not necessarily be a bad thing. If you live in a rural area and you want to find a great place to play Pokemon Go, head on over to New York. You could travel there, maybe you could be there on business, maybe you could be there just for a vacation. There's plenty of stuff to do in New York, but in terms of Pokemon Go, yeah, it's a very typical city experience. And I will say, based on my experiences comparing New York to places like Chicago, LA, places like Bali, it's a pretty decent spot, but it's not going to be anything special. It's just going to be your average day of playing Pokemon Go in a major city. But yeah, so that's going to be it. That's most of the places that I've been to. I've obviously been to plenty of other places, but I wasn't necessarily focused on playing Pokemon Go when I went to those places, but there are definitely great spots out to play. One place I want to shout out is actually Michigan. Michigan is one of those states where every place I've been to in Michigan, whether it be Grand Rapids or even places up north, there's a lot of really good Pokemon Go communities in Michigan. Another really great spot is North Carolina. Yeah, North Carolina actually has some Pokemon Go play as well. But yeah, there's just, regardless of wherever you go, like I've been to places like Utah, I've been to places like Oregon, like there's a lot of different Pokemon Go communities that you can join up with, and they're all usually very active. They're all usually doing a whole bunch of raids. They're all usually, you know, trying to communicate with each other, trying to be very welcoming to tourists. It's really just going to depend on doing your research. The best place to look is, of course, Reddit. You could go to a specific city's location or whatever, like, you know, the Pokemon Go, let's say Pokemon Go Utah. You'll find a community that way. And maybe you can get a link to a Discord or something like that. You know, it really just depends on how active you are in looking for communities. But aside from that, if you're just going by yourself or you're going with family and you just want to know what Pokemon Go is like, just understand that a lot of these places are not going to be as substantial as places like New York City or Chicago or South Korea, different things like that. So yeah, that's pretty much it. I really hope this video was helpful. And again, I'm going to be going to Korea And then I think after Korea, I eventually want to make my way to Japan, which of course is going to be the #1 place for Pokemon Go, bar none, according to everyone that's ever been there. I hope I can make my way to Japan one day. I think Japan would be phenomenal. It would definitely be the hallmark of this specific YouTube channel. But yeah, let me know what you thought. Let me know of any places you've been to where Pokemon Go is actually really good. Definitely share it down below. I think you know, maybe we could find some more hidden gems, and maybe there's going to be places that I will decide to visit based on your recommendations. Yeah, definitely share your thoughts in the comments below, and let's have a great discussion. If you've ever been to any of these places, definitely share that as well, and share your Pokemon experiences there as well. So yeah, in any case, that's going to be it for this video. I really hope you enjoyed it. If you did, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe if it's your first time here, and don't forget that notification bell so you can stay up to date on whenever I upload videos. And real quick, let me give a shout out to all of my patrons on Patreon. You make this channel content possible. If you want to support the Jinsula channel, the best way you can do that is going to be by joining my Patreon. And if you become a paid Patreon member, I'm going to add you to my Pokemon Go friends list. That means for stuff like remote raids, the friendship system, opening and sending gifts, especially on major events like Pokemon Go Fest. If you want to play Pokemon Go with me, then make sure you go and check out my Patreon. And if you want to support my channel in a completely different way, you're always welcome to do so by following me on social media. My handle is @Jinsula. I'm on the platforms you see on the bottom of your screen. Make sure you go over there and give me a follow. With all that said, that's going to be it for this video. I'm Jinsula. Be safe, have fun, love yourself, and I'll catch y'all later.
진솔아와 함께해